our soils program today. Dr. Edwin Ritchey, he's one of our soil specialists from Princeton, or well, I guess our soil specialist from Princeton, you're the only one there. He's going to talk about some other basics of soil and fertility and lime, R&D, all that good stuff. So again, earlier, you guys remember I said that a few of the things I kind of left out of my basic talk because I didn't want you guys to have to hear it twice. So, and don't leave today until you fill out the evaluation too, please. Gotta have those. So, Edwin, it's all yours.
Thank you. At any time, if y'all want to talk about something up here, just jump in and we'll talk about it. If I know the answer, I'll tell you. If not, I'll tell you that too. So we'll just get through it. So this is kind of, and I'll be honest with you, I might not should be this honest. I took 3 talks, pulled them together, to make this talk. So there's a lot of stuff that might not, no, there's not a lot of stuff. This might be a little bit too basic, but I just thought, hey, I'm talking about soils. What is soil? It's more or less minerals, rocks, the soil surface breaking down, mixed with organic matter over time, the influence of the environment, landscape position, the soil biology is what makes the soils what they are. The reason those soils are different is either pairing material, time, or some other soil forming factor. So that does make a lot of difference. And I've seen anywhere, you've seen soils deposit that much in a flood, but generally we'll say it takes 200 to 500 years to make it into topsoil. So we're not making a lot of it fast all the time. We're typically going backwards. Just a generic soil profile. That's not going to work, or I can't hit it. So that black up there is organic material, organic horizon. If we go out here in the grass, you have a dark surface. If you go out into the woods and start picking up tree leaves, the further down you get, and you pick up a leaf that's a maple leaf, you go down a little bit further, it might be a slimy maple leaf. You dig down a little bit further, and it might just be, the main stems coming off of it. Get down a little bit further, you can't tell what it is. Well, that's what you're talking about kind of on your organic horizon. That stuff breaks down and forms that real large topsoil, the top part of the soil horizon. What we're typically farming is an A horizon, the topsoil. That's the good stuff. Some of you guys are maybe unfortunate enough to have that B horizon as your topsoil, just eroded over time, over the years. And even though it's on the top, it might not truly be a topsoil. It's going to have a whole lot more clay in it, different soil characteristics. And then the deeper you go, you get into other things that haven't really been influenced by the surface. This is a slide I borrowed from Jerry McIntosh. I had him come up to Kentucky a couple of years ago, which is a CCA meeting for Kentucky and Indiana. And I really liked this slide. He said, yeah, use it. But what we have here, and since I can't make the pointer work, I see we've got a pointer here. So here's Indiana. This stuff up in here is glacial till, where the big glaciers thousands of years ago came down from Canada, pretty much like a bulldozer. They just knocked down the tops of ridges and filled valleys, mixed this stuff up, ground it up. This line right in here, according to Jerry, and he knows way more about this area than I'll ever know, that's as far as the glacier made it. Never really made it into Kentucky. But it did influence Kentucky because it backed up some water here. These bottoms that we have in McLean and Hopkins County, they're lacustrine bottoms. They're old lake beds. If you think about what water does, or what soil does in water, if you fill up a Coke bottle and shake it and then set it down, you'll see a layer of soil kind of fall out. That's your sand. And it settles out first. It's the heaviest, the biggest. And then leave it a little bit longer, and then your silts will start settling out. Then finally, come back a week or two later, and that water might be clear. That's your clay settling out. Well, that's Well, a lot of these bottoms in around McLean County have clay. They settled out over time over these old lake beds. We have this green area that's deep loess. We're fortunate enough, the whole state was covered with loess at one point. It came from the west, went east. Closer to the Mississippi River we are, the more loess we have, the deeper the loess. All this has a loess cap, but it's the underlying soils that differ. So the red area, we're looking at sandstone, siltstone, shale. The blue areas, this is limestone. This is limestone parent material. High phosphatic limestone, that's why the whiskey industries and the horse industries are centered around Lexington. High phosphatic limestone is good for apparently brewing whiskey, and is good for the strength of the race horses. So all this is what's underneath the soil that we're farming, and as I mentioned, the different soil forming factors, that's what makes our soil, or that's one of the things that make our soil what our soils are today. Soil separates the sand, silt, and clay. So sand, it's the big stuff you can see, you can feel, get it in your mouth, it's crunchy stuff. So then we have silt, smaller stuff, like powder, like flour. That's good stuff. That's really one of the key things that we want in the soil. And then we think about clay as being a bad thing. Too much of anything is not good. But you need some clay in your soil. That's the chemically active part of the soil. That's what holds your nutrients in the soil. And you can only see these with like a scanner and electron microscope. You can't get a hand lens out and see the individual clay soil particles. Soil texture, where we want to be, and where most of the state is, at least the topsoil, is in this bottom right corner, silt loam soil. That's about as good as we get. And we're fortunate as a soil scientist that I generally work I-65 in the west, and I give talks all the way to Fleming County as well. And I look at soil recommendations. On that 4 or 6 inch sample, that silt loam topsoil makes it easy for me as a fertility guy to give you recommendations. And I'll get into that a little bit later, but we're pretty consistent in that top 4 or 6 inches for the most part. Anytime you get really to any of the extreme corners, it's not good. You don't want to be in 100% sand. You don't want to be in 100% clay. 100% silt, well, that's a little bit different, but still, you'd rather have some clay and sand in that as well. Soil structure, so the texture, sand, silt, and clay, the structure is how it's arranged, how these sand, silt, and clay particles are put together, and it's influenced by the cycles, root growth, what you're doing with it, how you're treating it. Are you tilling it, or are you more plowing it, followed by some of the disc operations like we used to do for the backhoe? Is it no-till? All that influences the structure. And if you think of a structureless soil, it's either massive, something that you can't see lines or zones of weakness, or single grain, like playground sand. That's not really good for our purposes. Granular, that's the good stuff. That's what you find in the topsoil. And the first soil science teacher I ever had, he said, boys, this is like grandma's cornbread. It just doesn't get any better than that. If you think of grandma's cornbread, it's crumbly. It's the same thing with the soil. That's a good thing. And then you get deeper and you start getting into more blocky structure, which isn't necessarily a good thing. Organic matter, there's a lot to it. It's a nutrient reserve for one, but we kind of think of that as the glue that helps hold the soil particles together. It improves the structure, improves infiltration rates, so you can get the water off the surface into the ground. I've seen a bunch of different numbers for this. I don't know if there is an absolutely correct number, but somewhere about 1% of organic matter will hold somewhere around 17 to 20,000 gallons of water. So, approaching an acre inch of water with an increase of 1% of organic matter. So that's a good thing. And it also has a lower particle density than the mineral components of the soil. I think the particle density of most minerals is 2.65 grams per cubic centimeter, don't worry about the unit, but organic matter is less than 1. So it's about a third as dense. You just think about putting it together, it's going to reduce the density because it's a whole lot less dense. But then on top of that, it's kind of spongy as well. It allows the soil to rebound after it receives the stress. So I will maybe go back for a second. No, I'll just tell you now. So if we think about the soil structure and the different pores, if we think about this is a great big old box, and we're throwing in sand, silt, and clay, let's throw a beach ball in there. Let's throw some basketballs, some golf balls. Let's throw a couple tennis rackets in there. What are we doing when we're doing that? We have voids in between these rocks or these balls and the racket and all that. Well, those voids are important. Lloyd Murdoch, when I replaced him, or I took his old position, to put it that way. But he used to have a slide, and I don't think I have it in here, but he said an ideal soil is 50% something and 50% nothing. That nothing is just as important as the something. And that nothing is that void space that will allow water to be held there. It will allow air exchange, gas exchange. So all those nothings, those voids are important. So we have different size pores. If you think of a macropore, macro means big, that's your large channels. So earthworm channels, oak root channels, surface cracks. This is what really controls how fast the water gets off the soil surface, your permeability, your infiltration, and aeration. So if you think about going to the beach or something and walking right up to the water, you see the water coming up, it gets on your toes and then goes back. For a split second, the water will stand there and it goes, it's gone. Real high infiltration rates. So that's what you think about with the macropores. High infiltration rate, but very low water holding capacity because those pores are so large. Then the other extreme, the micropores, the small pores. They're similar to pores in a sponge or a towel, and this is water held against the force of gravity. We'll get into that a little bit. A lot of that water is available for plant growth, but some of it's held so tightly the plant's not physically able to remove it. And then we have mesopores, that's essentially just the ones in between, and they do control a little bit of infiltration. This is where a lot of your plant available water is coming from. So if you think about taking a dish rag or a sponge and getting it wet, when you hold it there at the corner, water's going to start draining out. That's mostly your macropore water. It's not being held against the force of gravity. Then you give it a little bit of a squeeze. Now you get your mesopore, maybe some of your micropore water. Then you wring it as tight as you can and get all the water you can get out of it. That's your micropore water. What happens when you fold that thing up and put it in your back pocket? You get your bottom wet because you get to squeeze all the water out of the towel. That's the same thing with soil. Even though there's water in there, the plant can't exert enough suction to pull it out. So that's our pore sizes. Just going to touch on water use and loss. So transpiration, that's the water that comes through the soil, goes through the plant. That's what drives pretty much everything. If that water is not going through the plant's not growing, the plant's not taking up nutrients. Water has to be going through that plant at all times. Evaporation, that's just putting a cup of water right here, coming back in a week, and losing that much to the environment. Water in a field that's being evaporated is not doing that plant any good. That's one of the great benefits of no-till. You have a surface mulch there, you reduce the evaporative soil losses, even though you have the same amount of water. It's forcing that water, or it's not really forcing the water, that water is available for the plant to take it up. If it's just going up into the air through evaporation, it's not going to do the plant any good. And then a lot of times we talk about evapotranspiration, just combine those two together. Here's a little cartoon drawing of a plant. So, sun's driving this essentially, the plant's transpiring, water's coming out through the leaves. As that water is going out through the leaves, it's taking up water through the roots. Kind of think about a soda straw or something. Because I'm sucking, water's coming in until I run out of water, and then it goes, or whatever racket it makes, you're out of water. Same thing with the plant. It's a kind of a continuous flow until it runs out of water. Nutrients are going into the plant this way. You don't have transpiration, you don't have nutrient uptake. I know you can take up some by just root interception and all that. For the most part, you don't have water, you don't have nutrient uptake. So plant available water, we go back to that sponge analogy, we're holding it there, free water quits draining. That is fill capacity. That's a good thing. Then you go to the other end, after you wring all the water you can out of that sponge or dish rag, and you can't get any more water out. That's permanent wilting. Plant will not survive after that. So the water between fill capacity or permanent wilting point is what is available to the plant. And that differs with different soils, and it's an energy status. It's negative 1/3 bar, negative 15 bars. I have no idea what that means. It's a number that's in my head. That's minus 15 bars is negative 15,000 centimeters. So it'll be the same as putting water in a column, dropping at 15,000 centimeters. The amount of suction that's putting on it, it's just energy status. But that's how we calculate that. It's a little bit small, I don't know if you can see that. But I pulled this out of a textbook. There's, on the far left, is soil texture. So I have a fine sand, a loam, a silt loam, and a clay. The next column over is fill capacity, and that's in inches of water per foot of soil. The next one over is permanent wilting point, inches of water per foot of soil. And then plant available water. That's the second column subtracted from, or the third column subtracted from the second column. So if we look at the fine sand, and like I said, I don't know if you can read that, but there's 1.4 inches of water in a foot of soil, that fine sand. If you go down to the loam, there's over twice as much, 3.1 inches of water. If you go to the silt loam, it's 3.4 inches of water. When you go to the clay soil at the bottom, 3.9 inches of water in a foot of soil. So it sounds like, hey, the clay's better. It's holding more water. But if you look at this permanent wilting point, even though the sand is only holding 1.4 inches of water, you can almost get all of it out. You can get an inch of that water out, have 0.4 inches of water left, a permanent wilting point. As you go down, you have more that remains. So that clay started at almost 4 inches of water, but there's still 2.5 inches of water after it's at permanent wilting point. That's silt loam and the loam. If you look at that, 1.9, 2.0 inches of plant available water in those two. The fine sand, 1, the clay, 1.4. So that's why I said we're kind of blessed in Kentucky to have this silt loam texture. A lot of it comes back to plant available water. It's just math. It's straight up math and physics and stuff that goes on with that. But we're pretty fortunate here in Kentucky. And here's a little calculation that I did. I haven't updated this in a while because I really like the way this works out. But this is for Princeton, Kentucky. I pulled these numbers 4 or 5 years ago, the 30-year means. It came up to 51.45 inches of water. I always round it up to 52 inches of water because it makes the math easy, and I like easy math. 52 weeks in a year, so that means we're getting 1 inch of water per 1 inch of water per week. Well, that's assuming we have an equal normal distribution, but it's not too far. 4, 4.5, 5, 3.5. So, I mean, it varies some, but for the most part, that's a good rough approximation. So we're using that good silt loam soil that has 2 inches of available water per foot of soil. Now we're going to be generous and say we've got a soil like that that's 2 foot deep. So that means we can have 4 inches of plant available water in that 2 foot of soil. Our evapotranspiration, the water that's going through the plant, the water that's going off to the atmosphere, 6 inches per month. That's just ballpark figure. It's going to change depending on what you're growing, what time of year, what kind of environmental conditions. But essentially, this at 0.17 is how much we have inches per inch. We're losing 0.2 in evaporation every day. If you do the math on this, that means if you start full with that soil profile full, we've got 20 days worth of water stored in that 2 feet of soil. It's not bad. Well, what if we start half full? We only have 10 days of water. But that's pretty good, isn't it? Because we're going to get an inch of rain every week, just like we need. So we should never have any trouble. But we all know that's not the case. We might get 5 inches in 1 week, and we might not get another inch for 7 weeks. Distribution. But the greater your plant available water, the greater the depth of your topsoil and the soil that's able to hold the water, the better off you're going to be. This is some work that I did while working on my PhD in Lexington. The left axis, the y-axis there is bulk density. It's just grams of soil per centimeter squared, weight per volume. You can name pounds per gallon or pounds per cubic foot, whatever you want to, but it's a density. And then on the x-axis, we have water content in grams per gram. Multiply those numbers by 100 and you get percent. So what I did, I took soil, well, let me back up a second. That pink line is no-till, and then the top line is conventionally tilled. I was working in the back of it at that point, but it doesn't matter. The soil doesn't really care what it's growing, and that's the system I was in. So I took soil from the top 4 inches out of both of those systems, the no-till system and the till system. And our tillage and tobacco, we would flip that soil over with a little plow, then come back, and maybe they would seal it, just pull a drag over to let the sod break down. But generally, we'd hit it with a disc 2 or 3 times, let it sit, come back, hit it with the disc again. Then before then we'd put our chemicals down, and then they generally hit it with the soil finisher, and then we might hit it with the soil finisher again. Working that soil way too much, but that's the way, typically tobacco was done. We were on a research farm, I was working for a tobacco breeder. He could care less about, soil conservation or whatever. He wanted the best crop that he could grow so he could make selections to increase, improve bourbon tobacco varieties. So, a good ideal bulk density is somewhere between 1.35 and 1.4 grams per centimeter cubed. That's somewhere down where between those 2 points on the left line. As you get higher, as I said, that's the density. The higher the density, the harder that root it has, the more resistant the root has to go through to push through it. And, too high of a density is not a good thing. And that's going to differ for different plants. Some fescues pretty tolerant to compaction, whereas other plants like tobacco is not. But what we did, if you can imagine a Pringles can, I had 2 steel rings. They were 3 inches across in diameter. They were about 3 inches tall. I stacked 2 of those on top of each other, filled it full of soil, and then dropped a heavy metal rod with no weight. Just dropped it down 5 times and packed that soil as much as we could. So we started here on the left. That was as dry as I could get it on the bench top. It was about 2.5% moisture, sitting out for about 2 weeks on the bench. Then we compacted the conventional till, took that top ring off, took the little bottom ring off and shaped it where it was even. So I had no volume, and I put it in the oven, dried it down, got my little density. Did that for the conventional till, did that for the no till. Then I took a little spray can like you'd spray, like I would spray my little sister with when I was a kid or whatever, but just mixed it over it, did some calculations. I was trying to wet it up 5%, and I got pretty close. So we wetted it up again, did the same thing, compacted it, shaved it, dried it, and you can see both of those lines go up as the moisture content increased until we got to about 22.5%, and then that's where it peaked and then it dropped off. So there's a bunch of things going on in this graph. One thing, we'll see how interactive y'all want to be. Why do you think it dropped off once we got above 22.5% moisture?
It's hard to compact water.
Bingo. It's hard to compact water. It's, to be honest, almost impossible in this kind of a setting. Can't compact water. Now, I'm not saying you're not messing up your fields when you're going through wrapping it up. You're changing pore size and all that, but you can only compact water. Or you can't compact water, something's got to be it. But what we see here is that that pink line is always below that blue line. The only difference between those two soils, that pink line had a 3.2% organic matter, that blue line on the top had 2.7% organic matter. That's a 0.5% organic matter there. So organic matter is a good thing. I mean, it's not the end all, cure all, save all for everything, but generally to a point, the more organic matter you have, the better off you are. That's one of the things that no-till really helps us with. It showed you before, you get that silt bottom soil, have some organic matter, you have very water holding capacity as well. So I probably spent a month making that graph, so anytime I get to use it, I do, because I have a lot of time invested in it. So this is another way to look at compaction. Say, I know no one in this room will do this, so I can use this example. I really need to run my planter today, but the ground's too wet. I'm going to run a disc or something or another, cut it to about 6 inches, open up the air, let it dry out so I can get in 2 or 3 days quicker or a day quicker with my planter. But when you do that, if we go back to this, and I forgot this point, right there at about 22%, you know what moisture that is? That's about fill capacity, somewhere in there, when the free drainage stops. So essentially, as soon as you can get on your field and not rut it up, is also the place that is the most susceptible to compaction. So you might be robbing Peter to pay Paul, essentially. Yeah, I got in there, I got my stuff planted, but I'm creating other issues that I have to contend with. So, like I said, no one will do that, but we'll just use someone in Lexington. They did that, and they had to create a zone of compaction at the bottom of that disc at 6 inches. Well, what's going on? You have something the roots can't penetrate through, so they can't get the water underneath, they can't get the nutrients underneath, and then it starts raining. Water holding works both ways. It's not only how much water can go out of the soil into the plant, but how much water can come out of the sky and go into the soil before we start running off. So if you get a little rain, hey, that's not too bad. Well, when it starts really raining, you have that compacted layer at 6 inches, now you start stacking up and you start seeing bad things. Tobacco really isn't like with feed. A lot of crops do it, some tolerate it better than others. So if we do that exact same calculation before, so we had 20 days of water, if we started with 2 foot of soil, the best silt loam that we have, and everything's good. We have that same soil, now we only have 6 inches. So instead of 2 inches or 4 inches of plant available water, we have 1 inch. So So same evapotranspiration rate, now you only have 5 days worth of water stored up in that soil profile for the plant to utilize. You know, if you're half that, half that is 2.5 days. And I use this when I have to talk to turf people or give homeowner talks, master gardener. I use this analogy in these new subdivisions. What do? They come in there with a dozer or blade or something, you know, scrape the topsoil off, make your foundation, build your house, come back and put about that much soil on top of that clay subsoil. And then what happens in June, July, August when it quits raining? You see sprinklers fire up everywhere because that soil is not physically able to hold enough water to get that grass through the week. So I mean, same thing with the crops. Any questions on that? Now we'll get into this utility stuff. I didn't know exactly what Carrie wanted me to cover, and that out there is kind of a fun talk.
What's your thoughts on using a subsoil? Is that really your natural pores?
It depends. Well, one thing, if you're doing it when it's too moist, you're just cutting slop through there, it's probably not doing you much good. If you use a subsoiler, if I'm recommending someone use a subsoiler, the first thing I will say, what's your reason? If you have a known layer of compaction, if you stick a penetrometer in the ground and it goes down that deep, and then you hit the top of the pan here, hit the bottom of the pan here, so we're 12 inches deep, we've got a 4 or 5 inch layer that's compacted, subsoiler's going to break that pan up if you get it dry moisture. Dry enough, it's going to shake. If you're in a fragile pan soil, it's not going to be any good. Or let me rephrase that, it's going to be very limited how good that will do because that fragile pan is going to reform. There's been a lot of work done on that, and they reconsolidate over the year. So yeah, I might get a little bit out of it, but this time next year we're back to where we started. And then, he said, you know, if you use a penetrometer, you know where your compacted layer is, that's good. But what if you push it down 3 feet and it never gets any looser? Well, you're not doing a whole lot of good there either. So if you can identify a layer of compaction, and this is going to be mostly your traffic lines, where you bring your grain carts in and out, your semis, stuff like that. Most of the time, the whole field will not have a compacted layer all the way across. So it's another tool in the toolbox. Should you use a screwdriver to take the oil filter off its own? No, but it works. It works better to turn a screw that. So, I mean, I guess not really smart enough or whatever, it's just all it is.
How long would it take, if you did have a known compaction layer, and use cover crops, will cover crops break that compaction layer up over time, and how long will it take?
Go back to my good old extension training, it depends. How tight is that? How deep is it? What kind of cover crops are you growing? And I've heard people say, oh, these tillage radishes, they're the best thing ever. They can be good. It's a tool. But if you have a compacted layer that's as hard as this ground I'm walking on, they just physically can't get through there. If you can get a pore that goes through the root that finds a weak zone, it's going to die. And then hopefully the next crop, the root's going to find that zone of preferential flow, so to speak, the weakness, go through there, get bigger. Just like you see cedar trees growing out of the side of the road cuts where it's solid rock. It had to have a foothold. The bird probably pooped a seed out there, it found enough stuff to grow. It made a little hole, it broke down the soil, freezing and thawed, and opened it up a little bit more, bigger root can grow down. So, yeah, they can. I don't think it's going to do the same thing as that subsoiler. It's not going to be as quick. Over time, it's going to help. It just depends on what degree of compaction you're trying to overcome.
But what I was thinking about was more on like hill type ground. But more something you don't need to be really putting on subsoil in anyway.
Yeah, I mean, I don't have I would try to get that right myself, you know, if you truly could identify, I mean, there's a lot of benefits to cover crops, minus that. Are they the end all, cure all? No. But I mean, it's another tool in the toolbox. You can increase your organic matter at the surface, those roots down low, when they decompose, they're increasing organic matter, so you have lower density, you have the other thing that the organic matter at the surface does, you have earthworms. They're diurnal. They kind of stay in the heat of the day deeper. They go up to the surface at night and feed. They go back down. So every time they're going up and down, they're eating, making a hole. They're pooping all the way, coming and going. They're spreading this stuff through the surface of the soil horizon. It's a good thing. But I don't know if there is a specific answer. I mean, there might be 30 answers for 30 different type questions like that. So, I mean, going back to my original answer, it depends. But, yeah, it's another thing you can utilize. Other questions, comments?
You mentioned earthworms just then.
Mm-hmm.
Kind of off subject, but what chemicals do we not need to be spraying that kills earthworms? It's not a, I've heard like Warrior and Tobacco was real bad on, but not all insecticides were bad for earthworms.
I'll be honest with you, I don't know. When we were using, when I was growing tobacco for the tobacco breeder, we were using Tracer, and one of the things the guy said, oh, it's safe on earthworms. I've heard the same thing about Warrior, but I'm getting outside of what I know.
Yeah, I didn't know. It's kind of a rule of thumb with Warrior. I didn't know if there was more from way back in the day. But
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, just to be honest with you, anhydrous will smoke an earthworm. I mean, if you think about it, what does it do if it gets on your skin? It's sucking all the moisture out. Well, it's not good for earthworms. Do I recommend not using anhydrous because of earthworms? No. Anhydrous is a good source. So, I mean, it's what you're trying to look for.
train on more.
Mm-hmm. But, I don't know who it would be. I guess a biologist would be a good person to ask. I don't have any answers for you on that. So, okay, well, we'll move on. Everyone, I'm sure knows this, but while we're a soil sample, we want to know what that nutrient status of the soil is, so we know how much we need to add, so that we're not limiting crop yields, or on the flip side, putting more down than we need. I mean, I'm not a tree hugger by any means, but I want my kids to be able to, drink the water 50 years from now. And if we don't do something to watch what we're doing, we're going to have people from Washington and Frankfurt coming down here telling us what to do. So, I mean, if you know your soil test phosphorus is 500 pounds per acre because I've been putting poultry litter down for 30 years, don't put any more poultry litter down. That's getting into the water. And someone's going to take a sample of that water, and then they're going to track it back upstream, like, these people are doing this. So, I mean, we need to be proactive on that aspect. So soil sampling gives us a guide on that. Another thing we can use it for is to help diagnose toxicities and deficiencies. Everyone in here knows what nitrogen deficiency looks like in corn, but what if you have some other weird thing, and you have a spot right here, half the field or area in the field, and then a spot right here that looks good, this one's bad, this one looks good. If you don't know, or if there's a combination, you can get a pretty good idea of just taking a soil sample and or a tissue sample from two spots, and looking, what do we have? The cost of soil sampling is really, really small compared to the cost of over and under fertilizer. And most people, you think of, how do you lose yield by fertilization? Or how do you lose profit by how do you lose profit by your fertilization program? Well, one, I don't put enough down, my plants don't get the nutrients they need, we don't get up there to max yield. On the other end, we apply more than we need, and we're not getting benefit from that nutrient that year. So, guys, what's the soil sample cost here? $6? $7? $7. bucks. That's pretty cheap. It must be a good sample line. I don't remember if I have it, but I use this analogy with, the age of people is getting a representative sample. If I happen to pick the youngest person in this room and said the average age of this room is the age of the youngest person, well, I'm wrong, because there's some older people here. Same thing, if I go to the other end and pick that up, well, I underrepresented the age because it's, I'm off. So the more samples, the more representative samples you can get, the better that sample is, the better your recommendations are going to be. So stay out of anomalies. Like if you know this was a fence road, that's not a good place to pull a sample. Because that fence road that's been a fence road for 50 years is going to have a different fertility status than the soil around it. What if you had an old hog barn where the manure was? If you take that sample and say it's 10% of your soil, but that sample only represented 5% of your soil, or whatever, you're underestimating the nutrient status of that soil. So you just need to make sure it represents the area. The acre furrow slice, 43,560 square feet to a depth of 6 2/3 inches deep, weighs approximately 2 million pounds. So soil sample you're submitting might represent 10 acres. We have different things. You read one publication, it'll say not represent more than 10 acres. We have another publication that says not represent more than 20 acres. My thought is if you can verify that area, no matter how big or how small it is uniform enough, it's been in the same management for years and years, then you can go up from that number. But the whole point of that is 2 million pounds in an acre. So 20 million pounds in 10 acres. How much soil do you think they run through the lab to give you a soil test recommendation? Take a wild guess. About a teaspoon. So you want that box that you're putting in there to be as representative of that soil as it can be. That's what it all comes back to. The more samples we can pull, the better off. 1,000 cores per acre. But, if you're pulling 5 versus pulling 10, 10 is going to be a lot better than 5. Just wanted to be representative. How often do we want to sample? In most situations, every 2 years is fine. Watch what your trends are doing. What we typically say, the higher the value of the crop, like dark fired tobacco, if you're growing wrapper tobacco or something like that, you probably want to sample every year. You make $15,000 an acre gross on good dark fired tobacco. Now, if you're talking about a pasture, well, you don't have to sample that often because, it's not as high value of crop, that fescue pasture. The other thing where we would say sample more is higher removal crops. You're growing corn silage, followed by wheat silage, come back with corn silage. You're removing a lot of nutrients from that soil, so you probably want to sample every year as well. Fall versus spring. Does it matter? Yes and no. Apparently I've been trying to lose weight for too long because I've been using this analogy for about 4 years. But the doctor was getting on to me, he's like, Edwin, you need to lose a little bit of weight. So I bought a scale and I put it in there, and usually the last thing I do before I go to bed is step on that scale. And then go to bed, get up the next morning, and I'll step on that scale again. Almost all the time, I weigh 3 pounds lighter in the morning than I do at night. Almost always. If I lost 3 pounds, well, technically yes. But if I look from morning to morning or night to night, no. I weigh 214, 214, 217, 217. So, same thing kind of with your spring versus fall soil sample. Those numbers aren't going to be exactly the same, but what you need to do is watch what your trends are doing over time. If I notice I'm going 214, 212, 210, yeah, I'm doing good. Dr. Sellers is going to be happy next time I see him. If I notice it's the other way, well, I'm going to have to listen to a little talk. So the same thing with your soil samples. It's not super critical. When you take them the same time and watch your trends. Depth, what we say, 4 inches for no-till, 6 inches for conventional till. I did my master's work at UT. All their samples are based at 6 inches. Does it matter? It depends. It comes back to something I'll talk about here. That's how the research was done. That's what the recommendations are based on. I'm a firm believer that we had good recommendations at UT. I had nothing to do with them. But the old timers that came before me, they were good. The local railroads, the Ken Williams, they knew what they were doing. So, I mean, yeah, I feel pretty good about following that rule. So, if not, if you want to take a 6-inch sample and no-till, that's fine, but still watch your trends over time. Your numbers are going to vary a little bit if what you're looking for in trends. So how much fertilizer do I have? Well, it comes back to the soil test I've been pounding on for a while. Waters, A&L, UK, they all three use a magnet-free extraction. All three of them are good labs. They should give you very similar numbers. But what they're looking for, all three of them, they've got to get soil in, they've got to get soil out. So they've got to do something quick. I mean, that's just how it works. So it needs to be quick. It needs to be repeatable. I should be able to take a sample, thoroughly mix it, send it off to 3 labs, and come back with about the same number. They need to take that soil sample, analyze it again, and come back with that same number 3 times. That's what they need to do. And it needs to be equivalent to what is in the plant. And that's where we're going now, correlation and calibration. So correlation is soil test a good predictor of nutrient availability. So this is for soil test phosphorus. You can see a 5, a 30, and a 60 down there on the bottom. On the y-axis, we can go, that's relative yield of maximum. We typically, in the soil fertility stuff, either use 95 or 97.5% maximum yield. Very seldom do we shoot for 100% maximum yield. There's reason for that, but 95, that's getting in the ballpark. So what you're doing, at that extraction, we know, just use the 5. If we're at 5, we're about 55, 60% of maximum yield. If we're at 30, we're way up there on the curve, now we're closer to 70%. And then you get up to 60, and it flattens out. So the yield at 60 is going to be the same yield as at 600. That's correlation. That's what that extraction is telling us. You can use Pepsi Cola to make a soil extraction out of it, but you need to be able to develop that curve. There's a lot of different curves, or a lot of different extractions out there. Magnet 3 is easy in the lab. It works good for this area. So that's what we use. Now, calibration. We've got that curve, but we don't know how much fertilizer we have to add at these different levels to get up to that 95% maximum yield. At 5, we need to add quite a bit. At 45, we don't have to add nearly as much. And once we get above 60 in Kentucky from 803 phosphorus, we don't have to add any. How do we know how much we need to add? Field research. So the old timers I was talking about, they had these different levels. They grew different crops. Okay, I'm growing tobacco, I have a soil test K or soil test P of 30. How much do I need to add to get up to maximum yield? I'm growing soybeans. I have a soil test K of 200. How much potassium do I need to add to get up here? So all the numbers that are in our AGR1 come from field research done multiple locations, multiple years, multiple crops. Our recommendation for tobacco is going to differ than our recommendation for corn, which is going to differ than our recommendation for wheat. Because we did that research specific to that crop. And what that extraction is kind of getting at is what is available to that plant that year. So if you look at the pointy end of that triangle, that's what's in the soil solution. That's readily available. Think about drawing that out. That middle block is going to move over and replace what this plant took up in the soil solution. Then you might have some of that far right block that's slowly available move over into that pool as well. But what that extraction is trying to get at is how much that plant is going to be able to get to and utilize in a year. Another way to look at this, and I talk a lot about chicken manure, and I found this, I like this little analogy. What happens when the water goes down below that hole? It bubbles a few times and it fills it back up. So if that's a 3-gallon or a 4-gallon container, we know how much water we have. That chicken or those chickens can bring 4 gallons. Well, what if instead of filling that thing full of water, we have a big chunk of ice, and then we have some crushed ice, and then we have some water. So the chicken's going to be able to drink some, but we're not going to be able to get 4 gallons back because that ice isn't going to melt quick enough to give it to them. So that soil test is getting an idea of how much is going to become available for that crop use in that growing season or year. I know this is terrible to see. You gotta get a bigger screen, Carrie. So this is the soil test from UK. I'm just going to show you what I care about. And it's not, I don't mean to be a smart aleck, but there's only about 4 things on here that I tell 99% of the people to pay attention to.
Man, we got a couple of copies of soil test already printed out.
So we can look over that if you want to.
If you just, they can follow along wherever.
Well, let's just, we'll chat and then we can come back to it if we want to. So we have soil test phosphorus on the top. That's in pounds per acre. Soil test potassium, pounds per acre. Soil pH, buffer pH. There's 4 right there that I care a lot about. Calcium, don't care about. I'm not growing tomatoes. If your pH is right, you don't really have to worry about calcium. Magnesium. Generally don't care a whole lot about that. Our recommendations say if you have above 60 pounds per acre in the top 6 inches, you're not going to see a response to it. But, you know, that's neither here nor there. If it comes up that it's needed, it'll be listed somewhere here. Zinc. I care about zinc. So I've got phosphorus, potassium, soil pH, buffer pH, zinc. I care about those. I care about these recommendations. These recommendations are the same ones that are in AGR1. They're generated from the recommendations we have in AGR1. You get questions on this all the time. Over here, ignore this whole section. CEC, base saturation. Are CEC and base saturation important? Yeah, they are. What does it tell you on your farm? Not a whole lot. CEC, and I'll go into this in a minute, but the method we use to report this, it's an approximation. It's not an actual measurement. It is not a guess, it's a calculation. Base saturation, yeah, that's important. What does that mean? Not a whole lot, because what we want to know is over here. So if I have a base saturation, my potassium has, I have 2% calcium on the exchange complex. Okay, what does that mean? I don't know, but I can go over here. I have 189 pounds for double crop no-till corn. Is that right? Corn, yeah, something. Here's our recommendation, 70 pounds. So CEC gives you an idea of what the reserve is of that soil, but this gives you a whole lot better idea because it was done, you know, specific to Kentucky conditions. The only thing I really use CEC for, and you can do a lot better job if you're on your farm, if I see a real high CEC, I know there's either a lot of clay or a lot of organic matter. If I see a real low CEC, I know there's a lot of sand or a lot of silt, not much clay, not much organic matter. That's why I reach down and pick up the soil and a lot better than that. So very seldom do I ever use that. Don't get hung up on it. I had a 2-hour discussion with someone about 3 weeks ago, and said, look, it just doesn't matter, Tony. Don't get hung up on it. So it is what it is. What about the differences in the soil layers? As I told you, those waters, A and A&L, they all use male-free. Generally have the same test. We test for pH, buffer pH, potassium, phosphorus, calcium, magnesium, zinc. We should get similar results from all 3 soils. Where they differ is their recommendations. My dad, he was a bonds kind of guy. He took his money and invested it in the government bonds. My father-in-law, he likes playing the stock market and buys puts and calls or takes or whatever, short sales, all that stuff. I don't understand it. I mean, he's pretty aggressive, my dad's pretty conservative. Does it matter? Well, it's just a different philosophy. They're both doing all right in retirement. So it's the same thing. One thing I am going to point out about this slide, we have different type of philosophies. Sufficiency, that's what UK uses, sufficient level of available nutrients. We apply enough for that crop to get through the growing season. We also have a little bit of the buildup component in there. When you get down low, if your soil test P is 10, we want to have enough to get that crop through the season to take it up a little bit. So you're not always staying at 10. Every time you're going to get up to that medium range. One thing I will tell you, that soil cation balance, if I make some people mad, I'm sorry. I'm trying to save you some money. Stay away from that nonsense. There's people that say you've got to have this much calcium, this much potassium, this much magnesium. If you don't have this balance, well, your crop's not going to grow. That's a load of crap. What it will do is allow me, as a soil test lab operator in Kentucky, to make recommendations in Kentucky, in Venezuela, in New Zealand, in Spain, in New York City. If you do have that ideal range that they're reporting, you're not going to limit your crop. There are going to be enough things there. But specific research data for that crop in a specific area is going to be a lot better. Anytime you use that soil cation balance, you're going to be applying a lot more than you need. It's just like me. I don't know, we'll say I need 1,000 milligrams of calcium a day to keep my body healthy. What happens if I eat 10,000, 10 times more I need? My body's going to take 1,000 in and will feed the rest of it out. Same thing with the plant. It's not going to take it up. It's there in the soil. It's not being utilized. Big deal. Had a farmer call me from Somerset a couple weeks ago, and he said, hey, I just need to know about this magnesium in the lime. And we got to talking. His lowest soil pH was 6.4. His highest was a 7.1. He was putting down 1,000 pounds of lime per acre because he had to get his magnesium level up. Really? I mean, these are tight times. I'd rather spend my money on something else than, something like that. So if you need it, you need it. But you don't need a balance. That soil test is going to tell you what you need. So, again, if I made anyone mad in this room, I'm sorry. I'm just trying to save you some money. What did I push, Carrie? There we go. So this, Kurt Judy out of Todd County did this when I first got here. It wasn't the best thing. It wasn't the best way. I mean, we did it in the lab. He took a bunch of soil samples, mixed them up real good in a bucket, and then split them and send them to 3 labs, UK, A&L, and Waters. And if you look at that, if you can see at UK, our phosphorus was 84 pounds per acre, Waters 79 pounds per acre, and A&L 94 pounds per acre. Those aren't exactly the same, but they're pretty close. If we would have taken that and ran it through a blender or a soil homogenizer, we might have got a little bit better of a mix. I mean, those differences partially are probably because you've got a little bit of a hot spot in one and not another. Another thing to point out about that A&L, see 47 ppm, whatever lab you use, and make sure you know what units you're looking at. Parts per million or half pounds per acre. So if you have 45 pound parts per million, that means 90 pounds per acre. Potassium, a little bit more variation, but 234, 243, and 270. It's not super close, but that's not too bad. But if you look down there at the recommendations, that's where they vary. If our soil test P gets above 60 pounds per acre, 61 pounds per acre, that triggers a 0 recommendation for phosphorus for all our crops. We're not going to recommend adding any because you're high enough, additional phosphorus is not going to respond. Well, if you look at Waters, at that same level, they're recommending 85 pounds P2O5 per acre. And then A&L is 60 pounds. Like I said, all 3 of these are good labs. They differ in their philosophy. UK might be a little, not might, we are more conservative. We don't think you need to be up in the high range. If you're at that medium-high breaking point, that's where that's most beneficial to your back pocket. Is Waters or A&L wrong because they recommend up in that high range? No, it's just a different philosophy. So think about that. Same thing with the potassium. At 234 pounds, we recommend 40 pounds. Waters is recommended 125. They're building you up faster and getting you up there, keeping you up there. And then A&L comes back in between about half there. Any questions on that? What we're looking at in different soil test levels, in the high level, we're saying 100% of those nutrients needed by the plant are being supplied by the soil. In the medium, between 70 and 100%. People say, oh, UK is way too conservative. Guess what? We've got a little slop built into ours too. For the most part, we won't see a response when soil test P is greater than 45 pounds per acre. But we still make a recommendation on that to 60. There's a couple of reasons for that. One, how good is that sample that's being submitted? Is that 60 truly 60 representing the whole field? Or is that 60 an average of 45 and 90? So, we built some slop in there. And then, so we go to 95% of maximum yield. There's a real small chance that you're going to respond when you're at a higher level than what we shut off now. So we're kind of covering our tails as well. So the lower your status is, the more you have to supply by fertilizer. I'm going to skip over that. Here's one that they use. You might get in trouble with this too. But I said we generate our recommendations based on response curves. We have this soil test value, we have this amount of fertilizer, we get this response. And step up till we flatten out. When we no longer get a response with soil tests, with our soil fertility additions, that's, you're adding. This right here, what do we see? Fertilizer rate on the x-axis at the bottom, on the vertical axis, that's wheat yield. So we're getting 85 bushels of wheat with 0 fertilizer. We're getting 85 bushels of wheat and 150 pounds of fertilizer. It's the same thing. That's a non-responsive soil. We kind of get knocked a little bit because UK doesn't have a sulfur recommendation. guess what? That's the soils that we have to work with. I had looked for 4 years trying to find a soil that is responsive to sulfur. I've seen a couple that might suggest that they are, but I've yet to get a response to it. So before we can say, if your soil test sulfur is this, you need to add that, we need to be able to do that. Or we could just prophylactic approach. If you're growing this, go on and put down 30 pounds per year out. That's not going to hurt you. It might get into your pocketbook, especially the 98 or 99% of the soils that don't need any sulfur. Why would we tell the whole state you need sulfur when only less than 1% needs it? So that's a little soapbox there. But we're looking at sulfur, we're trying to address it. If you think you've got a sulfur responsive soil, let me know. I am interested. But can't really generate a recommendation on that. This is nitrogen, but it's kind of the same for all crops or all fertilizers. That top line is yield over nitrogen rate. That red line on the bottom is your return on your dollar. If you can see that third dot from the right, that's about where your yield maxes out. About 100 bushels of whatever, I guess, wheat. We can add another 25 pounds of nitrogen and get about 2 more bushels. But what are we doing? We're going backwards with money. We're paying $20 to gain $2 or whatever. So that comes into our recommendations as well a little bit. We're trying to maximize this line, your profit. It's not bushels in the bin, but bucks in the bank that really pay the bills. So CEC and cation saturation, I've gone over this. Soil texture, you feel that with your fingers. Base saturation is another indication of soil acidity. Well, so is your soil pH and the buffer pH. Ability to buffer change, that's true. The higher the CEC, the slower it's going to draw down fertility, the slower it's going to build up. But your soil recommendations give you that. This is what it is. Your clay has a negative charge. Most of the, if you think of your potassium, calcium, magnesium, zinc, those have a positive charge. They're attracted to the soil. So that stuff is kind of held like weak magnets here. You have stuff floating around in the soil solution taken up by the plant root. And these are going to come off, get into the soil solution. So it's kind of an indication of your reserve soil test is a whole lot better. Here's what I was talking about before, calculated versus measured CEC. When calculated, we're just guesstimating based on what we extract from omega-3. When we're actually measuring it, it's a totally different procedure, and we're counting every one of those marbles instead of estimating. And here's another reason I say not to get too hung up on this CEC we report. This down here is what's actually calculated from your soil test result. This is what's measured. This is a 1-to-1 line. Ideally, you would like to see them all on that red line, but they're not. There's a bunch of scatter. And what we say, well, there it is. If your CEC is 10 or less, we're plus or minus 2. If it's greater than, if it's between 10 and 20, it's plus or minus 3. So there's 15-15, there's 15-12, there's 15-18. It's not an exact number, it's just an estimation. Carrie told me I had about an hour and a half. I'm going to skip through a few things. This is for, does it say? I thought I had 2 of those in here. So this one is for the whole state. I did have McLean County in here, but CEC on 28,658 samples that ran through in 2011, only 1% were less than 10, and only 14% were greater than 18. Pretty narrow range. That's why I say don't really get hung up on it. We're pretty similar. You get up in Indiana, which this was showing, you can have a pH range from 3 to 5, up to 30 to 40, or 50 to 100. CEC matters for their soil fertility recommendations. When you have a CEC in this type of range, it doesn't. Thank you, Silt and topsoils for that. That's a good thing. Okay, so moving on the line, it's the foundation of the soil fertility program. We adjust the soil pH usually up because we're acidic. We're trying to get it into that ideal range. It influences nutrient availability, root growth, herbicide activity, and you can kind of get some hidden hunger without even realizing it. You can lose yield with a low pH and it's not really showing visual symptoms. I've got a little red line drawn there around 6.4. That's what we recommend our pH for most crops. Tobacco, we recommend 6.6, alfalfa 6.8. Everything else that we grow in Kentucky besides blueberries and azaleas, 6.4 is what we're shooting for. And the reason being, the fatter these lines are, the more available they are to the plant. So if you go down through there, you're catching the fattest part of most of those lines. Where you get in trouble with low soil pH, one, aluminum and manganese, they can ding up the plant roots. Manganese toxicity was kind of common for tobacco because they'd lower the pH to help control black root rot. Well, you were probably getting in the range of manganese toxicity. Exchangeable aluminum, it dings up the plant roots. It's not able to function as well, so it's not taking up nutrients and water as well. Another thing, aluminum and iron, low pH is going to tie up your phosphorus. Get too high, get up above 7, 7.5, calcium is going to tie up your phosphorus. So phosphorus availability is maximized there. So, well, look, we don't have a whole lot of manganese. Manganese is an essential plant nutrient. It's a micronutrient, so we just need a little bit. We're getting enough with this little skinny part of the line. Same thing with molybdenum. Zinc, that can be a little bit tricky. Our recommendations, there's zinc phosphorus interactions and zinc phosphorus pH interactions. You can see the pH there. If you get to too high, you're at the skinny part. So we make our recommendations based on your soil test P, your pH, and then the amount of zinc that is in the soil, and make our recommendations based on that. So that's why pH is so important. Why do we have low soil pHs? Well, we're in the southeast. Our precipitation exceeds evaporation. So we're having more water come out of the sky than is going up into the sky. So we're driving our base cations, our nutrients down into the soil. If you go out west, it's the other way. They have salt deposits on the surface because what little bit it rains, it takes that water out, additional water as well, and brings like sodium up with it, and then you have a high pH. Well, that's the natural reason. What we're doing as producers, we're acidifying by the use of ammonium fertilizer. Is that a bad thing? Well, yeah, but it's a necessary thing we've got to do. We adjust it by pH. You can't grow 200 bushel corn without adding nitrogen. It's plain and simple. So we have this ammonium, it's NH4 plus, generates 2 hydrogens. That hydrogen is the acidity. Ammonium sulfate, there's 2 ammoniums per every sulfate, so we're generating twice as much acidity. If you're using 100 pounds of ammonium nitrate versus 100 pounds of ammonium sulfate, you're going to get twice as much acidity from your ammonium sulfate. The nitrates, they're not acid forming. Would I recommend using sodium nitrate for corn? No, if because it costs about $1.25 per unit of bed. You know, limestone is the way to adjust that, just stay on top of your pH. We'll skip over that. Already talked about that. We'll touch on herbicides. I'm not a weed scientist, but I share a technician with one, and I have a cell phone number, so if you have any questions after this, I'll give you his number, and you can answer, or he can answer. But y'all probably well know that effectiveness of some of your herbicides are influenced by pH. Triazines, atrazine. You get your pH too low, it's not going to work. Below about 5.5, you're really not getting much out of your atrazine. Get your pH back up to a unit or so, it's going to work a lot better. The classic in the accents is sulfonylureas. If you start getting above pH 7, now it's persistent, it can stick around for a while. So you have carryover issues. Keep it around 6.5, you're going to minimize most of that stuff. This is a picture from Lexington where they were doing some phosphorus pH work. And you can see the alley, or the bulk between the two corn rows is pretty clean. They were not lining that alley in between plots there, and you can see how woolly it is. That was a broadcast application of atrazine. That pH was about 5, or it was about 6.5 in the clean corn. So, I mean, that's a great example of what your pH can do for your herbicide activity. Sources used, the most dominant one is calcium carbonate, calcium limestone. If it's got enough magnesium in it, dolomitic. Should you go to pay the extra money to get dolomitic limestone? Probably not, unless you need the magnesium. Base your purchase on value or dollar for R&D. Quick lime calcium oxide, it's a powder, works pretty quick, very high R&D. Hydrated lime, similar product, has a little bit more water floating around in it. Pelletized lime, that's just calcium carbonate. That's the fine parts of the calcium carbonate squeeze into a pellet, and then you put it out. Gypsum. I've got it down there. It is not a liming material. And the reason being, if you look up here, this calcitic limestone, have calcium carbonate, you have a hydrogen right here. 2 hydrogens actually. This stuff dissociates, forms water, carbon dioxide. Your hydrogen now is in the form of water. It's not doing anything to your pH. Calcium sulfate or gypsum, you have your hydrogen floating around here. The calcium and sulfate dissociate. Then they they dissociate, plus you still have your water and your pH. There is no, or not your pH, your hydrogen. It is not consuming that hydrogen. That hydrogen is still floating around. It's not changing your pH. So don't let anyone tell you gypsum is going to change your pH. It's not. It's not lime material. Here's just what goes on. Goes in, takes off the hydrogen, and then replaces it with calcium. That's just the liming process. I need to want me in. I'm almost done.
I got a question on gypsum.
Yes, sir.
Soil tilt, unlike carbonate soil, will it help that?
I've heard a lot of reports that it will. I don't know. It's one of those things you can do in the lab to actually get it to happen in the bulk soil. It's questionable. Now, I've heard a lot of reports that people say it has. I've talked to a lot of people who read a lot of papers. I would hesitate to recommend it for soil improvement. I mean, there might be certain situations that it would, but I'd say probably very limited help. And the other thing that you do by adding, they're talking about tons per acre, 2 or 3 tons per acre, right? But when you put all that calcium down, You only have so much CEC, so many negative charges. Now you're knocking other things off. Chances are you're getting potassium off the exchange complex. So not only are you probably, if you're getting a benefit, it's very limited, but you're increasing your fertilizer bill too. Because now potassium that was on the CEC is now down, now the root's on somewhere else. So I've made recommendations for gypsum in about 2 or 3 different situations. One of them was where you had these oil fields, the brine soils, real high pH. Sodium is high, and the soil sealed over. Make gypsum recommendations, drive the sodium off, and that's okay. The other thing, there was a guy up in Davis County, he thought he had sulfur deficiency in alfalfa. Tissue samples indicated it. It looked like it. I went out there, I actually had a plot there, and I said, look, put about 100 pounds of gypsum down. That's a whole lot cheaper than putting ammonium sulfate down for alfalfa. So I mean, there's the kind of the 2 reasons that I would recommend gypsum. If I was trying to, on my farm, if I was trying to do some soil structure improvements, I would do an experiment just because that's what I do, but just so I can answer that question. And this goes with any product that you have questions about. Do it strips. You know, do a 40 or 50 foot wide strip, width without, width without, width without. There's enough technology out there. You come back in with your combine, nothing, something, nothing. Or, you know, you can answer that question for yourself. So
The reason I was asking, I've got a friend up around Indianapolis that uses cloven gypsum and cover crops, and it's seeing a lot of improvement. But they've got a different soil type up there than we do.
yeah, and my guess is probably the bigger influence is the influence of the cover crop over the gypsum. I mean, there's
He's
whole.
spraying this time every year, it's not like this.
See, it'd be interesting to follow that and see what is one, you know, if you have a plus gypsum, minus gypsum, you can test infiltration rates, test penetrometer, test soil fertility. And I am getting a little bit of a benefit from my fertilizer bill, 30% higher now because I've knocked a lot of my potassium off. So, I mean, I don't have a good answer for you. There's whole communities I'm associated with the American Society of Agronomy, that's our big meeting. And there'll be a half-day talks on this. There'll be people up there arguing left and right. Well, yeah, here's the data to prove it. Well, here's the data to prove that it doesn't work. You know, it's just, what is it? I will touch on this real quick, on about done carry, is that okay? Well, is it okay with y'all? Y'all want me to shut up or
Just make
5
sure you
more
put it on
minutes?
R&D.
R&D.
Yeah.
Okay, this is touching in on that. So how we determine what line rate you need to use, the water pH and then the buffer pH. So the buffer pH used to be something kind of nasty chemistry. Frank Secor, the guy that runs regulatory services now, he developed a buffer. You can essentially pour the waste down the drain. You guys can do it, but it's safe enough too. Where's the other stuff? It was pretty nasty. So you put it, once you take the water pH, you put this buffer pH in there, and it's at a pH of 7.5. Then you see how far that pH drops. So what it's doing, your active acidity, your water pH, is measuring the amount of acidity in that small beaker. Your reserve acidity, once that's gone, how much is in reserve to move over? Well, it might be that small, or it might be that big. So that's what's telling you how much your line, what your line rate needs to be. Hit this already. Man, I only had 70-something slides.
You went through 104 already.
I know. So, what are you trying to say? Real quick, surface applied line does work. It's going to be typically a little bit slower, but this 0 to 2, 2 to 4, 4 to 8, and 8 to 12 inches on the far left. After 5 years of growing corn, we'll say 150 pounds of nitrogen. That pH went from 5.7 to 4.6, but at 4.5 tons of lime at that same time, it went up to 6.4 in that top 2 inches, 6.4 in the next 2 inches. It's not moving up as fast as that, but it's taking care of the acidity which really getting you. Now, R&D. So the thing, there's 3 things really that determine R&D. Your fineness, your purity, and, well, those 2 things, there's 3 numbers, but those are the 2 things. How pure that is, how fine it is. So if you think of 1 cubic inch of lime, there's 6 square inches of surface area on that. You just slice it this way, yeah. Now you have the same 1 inch, but now it's quartered. You have 24 square inches. So that's the reactive part. The finer it is, the more reactive it's going to be. We say if it does not pass a 10 mesh screen, it's not effective. If it passes the 10 mesh screen, but not the 50 mesh screen, half of it's going to react in 4 years. If it goes through that 50 mesh screen, all of it's reactive. So I said 3 numbers: your calcium carbonate equivalent, how pure that lime is, and then the fineness. What passes the 50, what passes the 10, and the 50. So we take the calcium carbonate equivalent and divide it by that percent that passes to generate your R&D. I feel like I'm rushing through this, but your R&D, I have that somewhere. Yeah, it's right there. But so your R&D that you can get on the line test is the purity of it. If you're using ammonium nitrate 3300 to get 100 pounds of nitrogen, you need to add 300 pounds of ammonium nitrate. Same thing, same concept with R&D. If your R&D is 50 and you're trying to add 1 ton of effective liming material, you have to add 2 tons. So that's the same concept there. And you can do the math. There's different calculators, or you can pencil it out by hand. Just because it has a high R&D or a low cost doesn't make it the best deal. You need to take into account the R&D and the cost and how far you have to haul it. So this is just a quick example. Our water pH is 5.5, buffer pH is 6.5. We're shooting for 6.4. R&D this line is 67% based on AGR1 of your soil test. It's going to say you need 2 tons of lime of 100% effective lime. The lime's only 2/3 effective. You need to add 3 tons to get that 2-ton rate, essentially, just like that in your fertilizer. Here's some calculators that I know Carrie can get to you, or you can just Google University of Kentucky soil test lab or something like that, and it'll come up, regulatory services. There's these calculators where you can actually compare different sources and price it out. And this one has a little bit better R&D, but it costs a lot more. This one, the R&D is a little bit lower, I get it for a lot less, and it'll tell you which one's the better deal. This bottom one is samples conducted by Kentucky Department of Ag. They sample every quarry twice a year. Sometimes they're a little bit later than we like, but they give you the the R&D, the numbers, you can compare the quality of lime. So I don't know where you guys got your lime. I was busy ignoring her phone calls yesterday. I was going to ask her, so I just looked up what was closed. There was Davis County, Muhlenberg County, and Ohio County. I couldn't find a quarry for McLean, was there? Is there? Am I in the ballpark with these three? Where do y'all get your lime? No, so none of these even matter. Well, I got the three places. So what we have here, this calcium, that's your CEE. The one in Davis County is 91% calcium purity. The one in Muhlenberg is 77, and the one in Ohio is 85. So if you look at that, say, oh, well, by far the Davis County lime is the best. Well, then you have to look at your sieve size, the amount going through there, and there's not a whole lot that passes through the 50 sieve, but it's a lot more than passes through the 50 in the Muhlenberg. It actually works out that Davis County has an R&V of about 54. So about half of the lime you put out is not effective. I mean, is that bad? No, that's what it is. They can take this lime and put a finer grind on it, that R&V is going to go up. So the Muhlenberg had and this was October of 2015, the R&V was 43%, Davis County was 54%, and Ohio County was 50%. So if you have access to that, look at it before if you have options on your home. So just to wrap it up, well, I told y'all this before. So that's my talk. Questions, comments?
You may have hit it, I may have missed it, but what about the liquid lime that
Okay.
you see it advertised, I've heard both sides to this tale, but what does,
I do have that. Liquid lime. I don't know, these were some things I was hearing rumblings on and got on the internet and started finding some things. So one of the claims was 1 gallon of liquid lime is equivalent to 1,340 pounds of ag lime. Well, 3 gallons is equivalent to 5,000 pounds, or 2.5 gallons, and this is straight off web pages. So, I mean, 2.5 gallons can increase the pH on 0.6 of the unit, the top half inch. I don't believe that one, but I come closer to believing that one than the other two claims. So what is liquid lime? It's about 50% lime, about 50% water. So, well, it's actually 48% water, and there's a little bit of clay to help keep it in suspension. It is a high-quality limestone. They're not using a calcium carbonate equivalent of 50. They're using 100. They're using pure stuff. So it's good lime. Finely ground. The finer the limestone, the quicker it's going to react. The nice thing about ag lime, you have the fines, it's going to react pretty quick. You have the coarser material, it's going to last over time. So chances are you're going to get a quicker reaction with the liquid lime, but it's not going to last as long. It's going to do more of this than this. So what I did, I put this up for math time, just go through this. So if their claim is true, 1 gallon of liquid lime equals 1,340 pounds of ag lime. I had to make some assumptions, but I looked at the label. A gallon weighs 16 pounds. So that's now saying, and I'm not including all the water as limestone. I'm not doing 50% and 50%. I'm saying all this liquid lime is liquid lime. There's no water in it. The assumption I made was 1,340 pounds of ag lime, the R&V is 67. So I'm trying to help them out here. So that means now we have 900 pounds of effective lime. 1 gallon or 16 pounds is equivalent to 900 pounds. Do the math, and it works out that it has to be 56 times stronger or an R&V of 5,625. You can't change chemistry. We can't do that. So the truth in this statement is that 56 gallons of that product is equal to 900 pounds of liquid lime. Assuming it's all lime. Actually, it's about 112 gallons. And I mean, it works. Don't get me wrong, liquid lime works. There's applicators that are out there. But 1 gallon is not worth a half a ton. So I mean, yeah, it's a good product, but if it costs me 20 times as much money to use liquid lime as to use bulk lime out of a quarry, yeah, I'm going with the quarry lime all the time.
Is it basically like a Band-Aid in the spring, using pale lime, say we messed up in the winter, and then you get our ag lime down? Is that kind of the, I don't understand what the use of liquid lime to be over ag lime. The reasoning behind what you broke it up.
Probably a little bit better distribution if you have that equipment set up, if you can get it. Yeah, I guess it would be a Band-Aid if you got into a bad situation, but if I could run a lime truck versus that liquid lime, and if it's the same price, and I could get over the same amount of land, I wouldn't be opposed to going with liquid lime. But if it costs me quite a bit more for that liquid lime product, and I can get a lime truck out there, I'm gonna run the lime truck myself. Pelletized lime, it's a high purity material, and it's taking all the fines. It's taking this stuff that passed the 50 mesh screen, and then it binds it. It's a good product, but it's not twice as good as ag lime. And it's about 4 times as expensive. I saw someone was just the other day, I think he said he's paying $250 or $300 a ton for pelletized lime. It's a good product. That's what I would use on my half-acre yard or my acre yard because I don't want to run a lime truck through there. But if I'm spreading on a agricultural field, I'm going with the ag lime. There's a misconception that it reacts faster than ag lime. That's not necessarily true either. Even though it's all these fines, they're glued together. Like if you think of particle board or whatever, the sawdust that they glue together and then they put it in the house, and once it gets wet, it falls apart on you. That's the same thing that this pelletized lime has to go through. It has to break down. So if you think about taking, I've got a refrigerator and get my ice in cubes, right? You flip the button and it grinds it up and chews it up. If you take the same amount of ice and throw it up and it hits the ground, those cubes, there's going to be one here, one here, one here. Well, what about all this area in between? It's got to melt. It's got to bleed over. You take that crushed ice, you're going to have smaller pieces of ice. So you're going to get a better distribution, and it's going to be smaller, it's going to break down. You still have those fines that you have with the pelletized lime, but you don't have to have those fines made to break down. Where I have made a recommendation for pelletized lime, if someone gets in bad shape and like something's really screwed up by the vacuum, well, what's the pH? 4.7. Okay, get your 140 or your super seed out, fill up, inside there's lime in there. Is it going to make a difference? I don't know, but that's the only chance you have in the season. Can't run a lime truck through the vacuum. But look, what about, I put down 500 pounds of lime with my fertilizer every year. That's not a bad agronomic practice. You're probably about offsetting the amount of acidity you're spraying. You're just paying 3 or 4 times more than if you were using ag lime. It's a good product, but it's been, that's how you use it and how you need it.
It's a man, basically.
Mm-hmm. Just trying to, in that tobacco situation, just trying to get it a little bit better shape so he only loses 300 pounds per acre instead of 800 pounds. Questions? Any more? Apparently I've talked enough, my first.
You ever see any data on fields that are adjacent to limestone rock roads, just dust coming off?
I have, I've seen pHs above 7.5.
But they never put any lime on it.
Yeah, and, I mean, they are putting
Yeah.
lime on it, it's just the dust they generate when
I
they're
didn't
not.
know how far, I
looking
guess
at it.
it'd be wind speed on your drift.
Yeah, there was, I can't remember, there was somewhere out here, there's a guy doing some work in Lexington, and it went from pH of about 7.2, 7.3, right next to the field, down to less than 6, 300 yards away.
That far.
I mean, it went down. I don't remember how far it was way up there, probably 50 yards or so. But yeah, I mean, it's line, you're lining your field.
Every time a car goes down
Every time a
there.
car goes down there. Yeah.
On one side, you showed about the pHs. In pasture settings, you see more grasses happening if your pH gets below 5? When your manganese gets real, or is it the other way when it gets above?
Grass technique is low supply of magnesium.
Yeah.
Well, my answer is no, I don't know. I'm trying to read some through this. I don't know. Here's my hunch, reason to put it. Possibly. Probably not a big thing, but I do know that instead of trying to apply magnesium to the field, I mean, I think
They just give them blocks.
Mag blocks.
I just didn't know if it was attributed or could be tied to pH.
I don't know. I don't have to ask for it first.
Yeah.
I mean, theoretically, yeah, it makes sense that it could be. I don't know how
Be
big it
deficient
is.
in that mineral at certain pHs.
Mhm.